over 3,000 children in 6 charter schools in the city that were performing the worst in the state. Along with the association, with the Department of Elementary Secondary Education and Mayor Slay, we saw the closure of that. Without that kind of pressure to close failing schools, children will suffer. Those kids were not being well taken care of. Actually, bad things were happening.
And they were so wildly popular with parents.
Yeah.
Because, they were doing some things that parents really liked. The teachers were responsive when parents called, the principals, they were in nice buildings, but academically they were abysmal.
So it wasn't a popular choice, perhaps, a popular decision.
Right. Well, so that's sort of that's what Doug came down to. Sometimes, parents will exercise choice, but there needs to be some sort of self-regulating
Sure. There needs to be that monitoring to make sure that it's choice that really is going to advance the education of kids.
Right.
And that's not an easy thing to do.
I think
Because,
from our perspective, it doesn't, choice is one of, I think, several policy changes that we think are important to reform education. So I think that's part of it. Transparency, I think we would understand a lot more about how we're spending money if we had a unified chart of accounts that were used by all school districts across the state so that you really could compare and then use that data to try to understand how effective schools are spending their money versus less effective schools. So I think that's the type of policy change. The same thing when it comes to educator effectiveness, understanding, we don't make our choice of doctor based on how good their intentions are, and we don't select a lawyer based on how great we think they are. We employ those people based on their skill level, and I think that can apply to the classroom. There are ways to understand how effective people are in the classroom, and they need to be. We cannot afford not to have, at the head of every classroom, a highly effective teacher.
We also don't pick them just because they live on our block. Something back from Twitter is just equating right now access and location, one equals the other. How do you really change that? Joe talked about open enrollment in other places. How does that work? Where doesn't everybody just flood to one area and then people get turned away? How do you change this location equals access equation?
Well, I don't think you can just flip a switch on it, for sure. And this whole transfer situation is a vexing situation. There's no doubt about it. I don't think it's a solution. I'm just saying I'm not going to continue to tell people that they have to send their kids to an underperforming school based on their zip code.
So this whole idea that districts are sacred is the thing that I think we're really challenged with. Those are imaginary lines. And so how do we not redline? 50 years ago we were redlining for banking. Are we redlining by creating these permanent districts? And so should we be thinking
based on race, who could live where?
Right, and now we're saying you don't have access because you live on this side of the district line instead of that side of the district line. And so I think that's the challenge moving forward is, should we be thinking differently about how we organize the delivery of this? Something so dramatic, and it is dramatic to go to full open enrollment, may be harder. So can we look at taking maybe high quality charter schools, placing them on what now exist as these borders and allowing multiple school districts to have access to the same school? Can we take strategies that we're already using in the state of Missouri? You look at Missouri School for the Blind, you look at the Missouri School for Fine Arts. Those are choice options, and they're Missouri schools. Any child that lives in the state of Missouri has an option to go there. So instead of thinking about a big pendulum like we did this yesterday, now we're doing something completely, layering in some of these other choices and thinking differently about what those lines mean.
The only thing when you talk about open enrollment is we want to make sure that there are still schools in every neighborhood. Schools are not just about education when it comes to community. It's about property values. It's about community engagement. It's about bringing the community together for one thing. It's about football games. It's about morale. It's about morale for that community. And we've seen with open enrollment in our city and around in areas surrounding St. Louis County is that when you close those schools in those areas, you make those areas more impoverished. So we just have to be careful when we're making more open enrollment, more choices outside of the community, that we're not leaving the community desolate.
I think the other side of that, though, when you talk about property value, is, what does that say to the people who live in Normandy, who have lived in a district for the last 15 years that has been provisionally accredited, and you talk about property value, that's depressed property value. Now, if you were to open up that choice, whether it's the student transfer or something else, well, yeah, you could buy an affordable home in Normandy and start your family there and know that you didn't have to send your kid to a failing school.
But what I think what you're talking about is that idea of a school is part of the community center. It's your religious institutions, it's your schools, that's the center, your recreational areas. And so part of this layering is you're talking about making sure that the options that are in the community where you live are excellent, but then there are other options layered in, so that as a consumer of education, I can choose whether it's important that my child goes to the school down the street, or I can choose whether it's the school that is close to where I work because I want to have easier access during the day to get there, or whether I can choose based on the theme of the school, and making sure all those pieces exist. And it's not one or the other. Because I think you're right. You don't want your communities to be depleted.
I want to hear from the journalists on the peninsula part of the table here.
Well, I was just wondering, can you de-emphasize that districts as long as property taxes are the main way you're going to pay for education? Because that's, if it's the district that's important, but you're paying for it by the property taxes by the people who are living in that area, how do you de-emphasize the one as long as you've got that method of paying for it?
And then the question that I have, just to piggyback on it, in an open enrollment situation, and I'm assuming you're talking about allowing people to go to any part of the county or the city or whatever, is that correct, or something like that?
I'm leaving a hypothetical out there, but I think in terms of what the definition of open enrollment, pure open enrollment would be anywhere in the state.
Yeah, I just wonder if that occurred, especially if it was limited to the city and county, how many people in St. Louis City would, send their kids to the county, and whether that would have a hollowing out effect of people who might have their kids in some sort of public school in the city.
Well, if you don't have quality options, that could. But let me just say, when City Garden Montessori opened its doors in its new facility, people were buying homes in that neighborhood because they wanted to move there. They get phone calls from the suburbs saying, it's not fair that my child can't go to that school. When you provide quality, then you're going to be able to have a magnet for families. And so I don't think it's an either or like so many of these conversations. In terms of tax dollars, we can't let the old historic structures then dictate whether or not, so now we can't really improve public education in Missouri because we're sort of forced into these measures. The foundation formula itself is a mechanism for that, and it does compensate for the cost of education and how much property value dollars are coming into the coffers for that school district. I think we have a lot of smart people, finance people in this state. We certainly do in this city. And I think with some time on that, I think we could figure out either a formula base that works on that or some other mechanism.
And I mentioned that scenario because I think one of the issues in Normandy in particular is there are actually some very nice parts of the Normandy School District where middle and upper class people live of all races and nationalities. And I just wonder if those people, by the virtue of having the ability to maybe not send their kids to Normandy, maybe sending them to a private school and not participating in Normandy School District, that might have been part of the issue of the troubles there.
That's what Superintendent McNichols has said many times, that he's got some very nice areas in Normandy, but unfortunately the kids who live in those areas usually don't go to Normandy schools.
Well, let me ask you, before the desegregation case happened in 1980, we saw a decline in enrollment in the St. Louis public schools. And no one claimed that there was a problem in St. Louis when families moved to the suburbs for public education. So the issue around choice and access is only coming now when we're saying that this is because of its quality, not because people have means.
But but since the desegregation case, we haven't seen the goals that we want in the benchmarks, hit the benchmarks, and the accreditation we desire in St. Louis public schools. So we can't say that allowing people to choose a county school has solved the issue for the district that's there. The same thing has been said about Normandy Riverview. Allowing kids to leave and transfer out of the district is not the solution. It has not improved those school districts.
And forcing families to stay in failing schools isn't going to work either. It doesn't
So-
work for the families, and it doesn't work
That
for
can
the
be
neighborhood.
one thing that we definitely agree. I don't blame any parent for choosing to send their kid to a better school, but our focus should always be on improving school districts as well, improving the kids that are left behind, because we know that the overwhelming majority of the kids stay in those schools. So we can work together on that.
I think that the focus always has to be on what's in the best interest of the children, and the districts and structures behind it need to be molded and bent to find a way to address the children, not to address the
So let's
district.
create better education, not just access.
Well, it's both and, yeah.